Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
Edgar Mobbs, Rugby International, sportsman, soldier and legend, is a fascinating book on some would say a forgotten hero of rugby union. It is the new tome by John Cooksey and Graham McKechnie. It will be coming out later on in this week. Delighted to say that Graham joins me live on the line now. Graham, good morning to you.
Good morning, Giles. Thanks for having me.
First question, did I get your surname right? I've been practicing all day. I probably got it wrong.
McKechnie, however you want to say it, that was near enough.
That's fair enough, and there you go. So, for those who don't know your oeuvre, of course, you are eminently qualified to write about rugby because of your day job.
Yeah, so my day job is I'm sports editor at BBC Radio Northampton. So obviously we are the home of Northampton Saints. We've got a very fine football team, the Cobblers as well, cricket as well. But a lot of my time is taken up with watching the Saints. And we've had some pretty good times in recent years as well.
Yes, indeed. I remember many lifetimes ago, I went to an event up at Market Harborough and there was a very young Martin Johnson playing. So that takes me back a bit. So there you go.
Oh, don't mention Martin Johnson. The Leicester Tigers are not exactly popular in this neck of the woods.
To put it mildly. Right then, looking at... so who is Edgar then? And how did you come across this particular, his particular story?
Well, so Edgar Mobbs is one of those characters who's actually locally very well known. In Northampton, he's still a huge name that if you walk around the town, you'll see, two statues of him. There's one in the Market Square, or just off the Market Square in the Guildhall, and there's one in Abington Square as well. There's also Edgar Mobbs Way, the road leading up to Franklin's Gardens. So his name's actually reasonably well known still in Northampton. He's talked about in schools as well. And there's also the Mobbs Memorial Rugby match, which has been going on every year since 1922. They played it a couple of weeks ago when Saints played against Bedford. So his name locally is still pretty well known for what he achieved on the rugby field, but also what he subsequently achieved in the First World War. It's a staggering story. And even before I moved to Northampton, I've been here for 15 years or something like that now. Even before I moved here, my interest was very much in history and sports, and in particular the First World War and sportsmen who fought in that. And Edgar Mobbs is a huge name within that particular niche of history.
Because it's young men who answer the call of you could say of empire, of the king, and go off and fight on the in the horrors of Flanders without so much as a backward glance, isn't it? Really, this is one of the things. It's duty and country, and could you argue play up and play the game, Graham? Or am I being too facile in this one?
No, I don't think that's unfair. I think that's about right. It's certainly what was going on in August and September 1914, which I suppose is where the Mobbs legend began. Look, prior to that, he was a huge figure in the world of rugby. He captained England. He was an astonishing rugby player for Northampton. He was a celebrity in the East Midlands. When I talk in schools about Mobbs, I'll talk about how we think we live in an celebrity-obsessed age. But it was just the same back then. The newspapers in Northampton certainly were full of Mobbs scoring tries. He scored 177 tries in 234 games for Saints. A staggering record. He was tall, he was blonde-haired, he was fast, he flew down the wing, and he captained England as well. He was the first Northampton man to captain England. So he's a big star. And then, I suppose, even if the First World War had never happened, we would still remember him in Northampton for being this sports star. But what happened, as you say, the answering the call in August 1914 means that he transcends sports and becomes this hugely important figure of civic and county pride for Northampton, and for sporting pride as well, because the game of rugby, well, Mobbs was almost the embodiment of the values that rugby wanted itself to be recognised with, of honour, of duty, of leadership. And that's what he did. So, look, it's a complex story. But you mentioned answering the call.
Yeah.
And that's what he did in August 1914 when they wanted volunteers, and Mobbs set about raising his own company of men, using his celebrity. And that's exactly what he did in Northampton. And around 450 men answered the call and wanted to join with him.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's the saying that, the Battle of Waterloo was won on the playing fields of Eton because of the young men who fought, at Waterloo, obviously different war. But 100 years later, you have, young men, sporting heroes who do, as I said before, they go and and they transfer that sort of the team spirit, the camaraderie. I mean, the thing about rugby is a game like no other, and those of us who've played it, badly in my case, but those who've played it over the years know that. And there was I was just thinking about the Women's Rugby World Cup this over the weekend, and they were saying, people have been going, oh well, it's not, thankfully it's crushed the idea of women's rugby not being a high enough level. But they were saying that the thing about your team, listening to the former New Zealand rugby captain, and she was saying the thing is that you are surrounded by people who will put their bodies literally on the line for you. And in a world where people are saying, oh, well, there's no, we're broken as a society, you get 15 people on a rugby pitch on your side and they're your teammates, and they really are. And maybe Graham, this is what he brings to the trenches as well, and that optimism as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, look, rugby and the armed forces have always gone hand in hand. It's always been perhaps a closer relationship than almost any other sports, with the possible exception of cricket. That rugby has a lot of rugby players, even relatively recently, have served in the armed forces, which I suppose is what makes Mobbs' story so poignant. And even in 1914, rugby was very proud of its record. And these are, I suppose, concepts which to us, over 100 years later, feels slightly alien. Some of this idea of serving your country and duty is somewhat alien to us. But rugby was very proud that in 1914 and 1915, recruitment posters appear which say every England international have volunteered for the forces. Some of that, we've got to be honest, some of that is having a little dig at football, and some of it is to do with class and politics of the time, because football was very much seen, well, it's the professional sport and it was the working man's sport, whereas rugby, to a large degree at the time, was amateur, well, entirely amateur, but to a large degree was middle class, university, Oxbridge, public school sports. So there was a little bit of that going on as well. There's a little bit of a dig. I would say Northampton and the East Midlands, it was very different. That, unlike the London rugby clubs, the clubs like Saints and Leicester Tigers and Gloucester and Coventry, these were working men's clubs. And so the men that joined with Edgar Mobbs in 1914, in August and September, these are men from the shoe industry, by and large, a huge number of shoe industry workers from Northampton, what made Northampton famous, but they wanted to serve. And as I say, the myth of Mobbs is that he went off to the recruitment office to volunteer himself, and they turned him down initially at the age of 34. They said he was too old. I find that very, very hard to believe. I think that's probably a little bit of the mythology they developed even at the time, because that was the story that appears in the paper. I think the reality is that there's no way they would turn down the England rugby captain on the grounds of age. They concocted a plan, and they got him to stage a series of meetings around Northampton, and they used him as a recruitment tool. When men joined, it continued even after that, because they then played rugby matches around the south of England and in Northampton, encouraging other men to answer the call as well. So it was a clever ruse, but behind it all was this fierce loyalty and patriotism. As you say, that was very much in the DNA of rugby. And
the other thing is the fact that we can look back now and go, oh, the terrible, the Great War, loss of life and, the slaughter on the Somme and all that. But of course, this is 1914. This is when Rupert Brooke is writing about going on. And everybody, Kipling is writing about, Rudyard Kipling's writing about, the great adventure, and it's, war is going to be this, because there hasn't been a mechanized war like there will be in the First World War, and therefore people people haven't got the hindsight of what's going to happen, the terrible casualties going to happen. So people might say, oh well, Mobbs was just doing things to the British Empire and blah 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 blah. But at the time, again, it's a different mindset. It's a different society. The Edwardian society. This is something you do for and nobody can foresee the slaughter which will take so many men, Mobbs included, when he is recruiting in 1914.
No, I think that's a fair point. And I think, and you used the spirit of adventure. I think that was very much something which drove men to join, not just in Mobbs' battalion, but elsewhere. I mean, I mentioned that in Northampton it was about the shoe industry. These were men who had tough lives working in the factories, just as if it was Barnsley, it was the coal fields, or if it was Burnley or or that part of Lancashire. It was the mills. These were tough lives.
Yeah.
And a lot of these men hadn't really left their counties particularly. And suddenly they're offered, they're well paid to join the army. There's this spirit of adventure. You go abroad with your mates. So it's a very attractive proposition for a lot of men. Certainly in 1914. Once you get into 1915, obviously then the recruitment starts to dry up. And by early 1916, we start to see the introduction of conscription. And that's a different story. There's the men who went in then. But you're right. The spirit certainly of that autumn of 1914 was one of excitement. And the cliche of it all being over for Christmas, I don't think many people really believed that. But certainly there was a great opportunity to go and have an adventure and to go and have a lot of fun. And even better, if you could do it with your mates and alongside a celebrity like Edgar Mobbs.
Yeah, indeed. I'm just thinking about the modern equivalent. If I had to go into anybody, I think I'd go with Jason Leonard, but that's a different story. Now, now he gets over. I mean, he's in. Well, I suppose we'd call it in theatre, as they'd call it these days. But he's there for a considerable period of time, isn't he? So he sees the development or the how the war pans out. I mean, is there any? Does he lose faith, do you think? Or am I putting a 21st century construct into what is basically a 19th century adventurer's sort of brain?
No, we have some insights on what Mobbs thought. We've got a series of letters that he wrote back to his sister. He never married Mobbs, but he did write back home frequently to his sister. And I think what you see above anything else is this relentless optimism that they talked a lot about with Edgar Mobbs. He had this shining radiance, this charisma. There's a lovely expression or a description of him from the Northampton Independent. My favourite description of Mobbs was one of the editor of the Northampton Independent, who knew him well, said, "I never knew one who exhaled such an atmosphere of sunlight around him." And that's what you see in his letters home. Obviously, there's some preservation. There's some concern for making sure his sister, I suspect, is shielded from some of the reality of what he was seeing. But as the war progresses, I think there's probably a slight change. I mentioned, the men who went out with him. He had around 250 men. The company, D Company, they were known as, D Company of the 7th Northamptonshire Regiment. It became very quickly known as the Mobbs' Own, certainly here in Northamptonshire and beyond that. But the Mobbs' Own, the men who went with him, they were being, not just whittled away, but scythed away pretty quickly. I mean, 110 years ago this week, at the end of September 1915, they were in action for the first time. They were fighting at the Battle of Loos. And roughly speaking, they went in with a battalion of around 1,000. Mobbs, as a junior officer, as a subaltern at this point, they were absolutely smashed at the Battle of Loos at a place called the Hohenzollern Redoubts, a tough place to fight against the professional army, the professional German soldiers. We're talking about a collection of shoemakers, teachers, tram drivers, bus drivers, just normal men who trained for a year. They didn't know what war was like, and they got absolutely beaten up at Loos. Roughly speaking, they lost around half the battalion, 450 men killed, captured, or wounded. So that was the first blow. They were at the Battle of the Somme the year later, where they had similar casualties. They had about 400 casualties in an attack at Guillemont in August 1916. So by the time we get to 1917, when Mobbs is commander of the battalion, he's Lieutenant Colonel Edgar Mobbs, leading them at Passchendaele on the 31st of July 1917. By that stage, there aren't many of the original men still with him. He's lost a lot of teammates from Northampton Saints and from England as well in other battalions around the war. He writes about that in his letters home. And it's at this point, I think in July 1917, he comes home and he meets his friends and he says to some of his friends, "I won't be coming back again. This is the last you'll see of me." And his final letter home to his sister Olive, he signs off, "We're going into an attack later this month. Pray for me." And that's the first time I think there's a note of, an ominous note that he strikes in that letter home.
If you go to any sort of village, parish churchyard, or I'm from Staffordshire, and I remember going through Whitmore, which is a little village, and I didn't notice it before when I was about 16, and there's a simple cross, and it's the memorial to those who died in the Second World War. But if you look at the First World War, and there's just literally legions in every, and that's a small village in between Newcastle and Market Drayton, and you just think that the whole scale slaughter of that youth, and for mobs to be that, you start the war, you're a rugby union superstar, you're surrounded by fit young men, full of promise and that glimmer in their eye. And it comes to 1917, and he's lost most of his teammates, most of his battalion, most of his mobs brigade. I mean, it just doesn't it? It when you write something like that, you must just sort of pause, Graham, and think about the loss.
Yeah, I think you think about the loss, obviously, and you start clearly to think about your own mortality. I've seen this a lot in letters, not just from mobs, but from other soldiers, other stories we've looked at over the years, that the longer you survive, the more you obviously start to think your number is up at some points. I've seen that, that's a pretty common theme. Look, he had a job to do, though, because he's still their commander. He's still their commanding officer. And I suppose that's where the final part of his legend takes place, on that fields or a wood. It's called Shrewsbury Forest, the Battle of Passchendaele, the 31st of July. That he struck that ominous turn that I mentioned, but he's still got to lead his men in this massive attack on the 31st of July. First thing in the morning, the men go through this wood. I call it a wood. And if you go there today, it's quite a picturesque place. But if you look at photographs, aerial photographs, taken on the eve of battle, is not a wood. It's been smashed to pieces by the barrage that the British Army has dropped into that wood before the attack. They go through at around 4:30 in the morning. The men are wearing shorts. It's a summer's day. Although it's been raining for a couple of days beforehand, it's muddy, but it is a warm day. And they go across trying to capture the front line of German trenches. As they move through, Mobbs, as the commanding officer, is in the rear at his command post, about half a mile back. A message reaches him to say that the attack has gone well, that they've taken the first line of German trenches. So at this point, he takes the decision to move his command post forward, deeper into the wood, closer to the action, so where he can see the situation on the ground. When he gets there, it's clear to him that the message that he received was wrong. That the whole attack was being held up by a single German machine gun position. And this is the fateful moments where Mobbs decides to attack. That he gathered a group of soldiers with one other officer, and they split. He took 3 one way, the other man took about 4 or 5 the other way to attack this German machine gun position. And it was whilst attacking this machine gun position that Mobbs was struck in the neck. A machine gun bullet hit him in the neck, and he dropped into a shell hole. And, he still had enough presence of mind to write a note, which he handed to a runner, which said, it outlined where the machine gun position was, but also he signed it off saying, "I'm seriously wounded." He handed it to a runner, and 10 minutes later, Mobbs died in that shell hole. So, a sad end, a tragic end to this radiant, brilliant man. But I suppose doing his duty, leading from the front. There's some criticism, actually, of should he have been doing that? He was the commanding officer. Should he have led that attack? Because he was this, supremely iconic figure for the battalion. And they'd lost their figurehead. They'd lost their leader. Should he have been doing that? That's the point where I think it's his rugby instincts, it's his sporting instincts, which just took over, leading from the front, leading by example. And tragically for Mobbs and for his story, that's where he fell. And that's where his body still lies somewhere today.
You talk about, that him paring down the wing, to the adulation of thousands watching him on a rugby field, be it for England, being it for the Lions, or being in his beloved Northampton. And then you get that image, don't you? Like almost like the movie Gallipoli, with a sprinter at the end where he's ready to take off. And he's just, and Mobbs is ducking and diving and weaving like he would probably be doing as he thundered down on some unfortunate fullback, probably a Leicester fullback. But you see what the parallels and leading from the front, because again, it is the time where the men are your family and the men are your team, and you lead from the front. As you say, it takes over, Graham. What was the reaction like then in back home when they found out that he'd been slain?
Well, it was, you look at the newspapers, as I do, of that period, and the aftermath, the immediate aftermath, they're heartbroken. Northampton as a town is heartbroken. Look, the town had, of course, endured its personal losses. As you say, the war memorials around the county, like any county, will illustrate the extent of the loss that's British society was feeling. But Mobbs, of course, represented an ideal as well as representing the county, and it affected people very badly. There's pages and pages of letters in the newspaper from his friends, from men who fought alongside him. The other thing people want to do, of course, is they want to do something. People, it's a natural instinct, isn't it, to do something, to find an outlet for your grief. And one of the ways they did that was a public subscription to build the memorial to Edgar Mobbs, which got underway pretty quickly. And as I say, the statue stands in Abington Square today, the bust of Edgar Mobbs, overlooking the war memorial behind him. So that's one of the things they did. And the other thing they did was to start the Mobbs Memorial game. The first game was actually played in December 1917, so just a few months after he died. It was played between servicemen from New Zealand and South Africa. They had a game of rugby at the county ground in Northampton to raise money for the prisoners of war. And that gradually evolved and took shape. So by February 1922, the Barbarians played against the East Midlands in the Mobbs Memorial game. And that took root, and that's been going ever since, with just a few years off during the Second World War and for COVID.
What do you know what happened to Olive, his sister? I mean, I know it's a long shot, but what are the sort of repercussions? Because he said he didn't marry, so that was presumably the closest he got to his family.
Well, the family's still around, actually, happily. The Mobbs family, there's his great nephew, who's also called Edgar, is still seen at Franklin's Gardens. His nephew is somebody I know as well, Jenny Edwards. She's often seen around as well. So the Mobbs family actually went on to be very successful. They were a pretty extraordinary bunch, really. One of them founded Slough Trading Estates. One of the others had a very successful motor car industry. So you look at the lives, and this is what I often do, or you often consider, especially when you're looking at huge cemeteries of the First World War. You think about what people achieved after the war, and you think about the loss as well, and what all of those men who died might have gone on to do. With Edgar Mobbs, well, who knows? He spoke to a friend, according to one of the books which was written after his death. He spoke often about emigrating to Canada. So who knows? He could have gone on to be a civic leader in Canada. I suspect he would have ended up some sort of civic leader in Northampton, a member of Parliament, or he would have done something. They were made of pretty extraordinary stuff, men like Mobbs. He was a natural leader, and his rugby career would have come to an end naturally at the outbreak of the First World War. He'd kind of retired by then anyway. But I am sure he would have gone on to achieve great things in society, just like many other of the thousands of men who died in the First World War. They talked about Mobbs' loss being irreplaceable, which it was for the people who knew and loved him. But that was a story which was repeated tens of thousands of times across the country.
The book is called Edgar Mobbs, Rugby International, Sportsman, Soldier and Legend. It's by John Cooksey and Graham McKechnie, who are speaking to today. It's coming out tomorrow, isn't it, I believe? Is it officially launched tomorrow?
Well, there's been a slight delay.
Right.
But don't worry, it will be out shortly, but there has been a little bit of a delay. But keep your eyes out, because it will be out very soon.
Listeners, if you go to the TRE website, I'm sure as soon as it comes out, we will put it on for you so you can order it as well. Graham, if people want to say nice things to you, where's the best place to find you?
If you want to find me, well, head to BBC Northampton. I'm always hanging around there. So yeah, do come along. I'm often out and about. I work for Northampton Saints in an unpaid role. I hasten to add, as the club historian. So if anyone listening wants to know more about this story, or if they have connections to Saints or Northamptonshire and have any stories they want to know about, contact me through the BBC or through Northampton Saints. I'm always very pleased to hear about people, and I always meet these people. Even I'll tell you now. Yesterday, I was at Northampton. I was watching Saints draw an extraordinary game with Exeter, and there was a chap looking at the War Memorial, because the War Memorial overlooks the pitch at Franklin's Gardens.
Yeah.
A man looking at the War Memorial, and I said, "Oh, can I just ask what you're looking at?" And he said, "Well, that's my great uncle named on there." And so there's still these connections which are springing up all the time. So if you have one, please get in touch. I'd love to hear from you.
And the thing is as well, Graham, I'm just going to bother you on this one for 1 second more. We talk about the values of rugby, and if Mobbs was to come and watch, was there yesterday, say he had a time machine, the values are still there, aren't they? I mean, people say, "Oh, it's all got professional and this, and women are playing rugby," but those values, that community, as I say, it's much more than just a game.
Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. And I will always sing rugby's praises, like I'd sing all organised sports praises: football, cricket, rugby, whatever is your sports. Those values exist, and there's nothing quite like team sports. I mean, we've just watched the Ryder Cup, which frankly trashed some of those values. But wherever if you're involved in team sport, especially at a local level, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's much, much more important than the simple sport itself.
Yes, indeed, and with autumn coming up as well, it's no final time to stand by the touchline and get absolutely hammered by somebody thundering towards you in a veterans match. But there you go. Graham, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you this morning. The book is called Edgar Mobbs, Rugby International, Sportsman, Soldier and Legend. Graham, thank you so much for your time today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Giles. Thanks for having me.